Before we continue, please be aware that this video is based solely on publicly available information, including court documents and verified news reports. All details presented are factual and derived from credible sources. Now let's return to the discussion. Every year, millions of Americans step aboard a cruise ship with one thing on their mind: vacation, sun, freedom. The feeling that for just 1 week, nothing bad can touch them. But on the morning of March the 24th, 1998, somewhere in the Caribbean Sea, a 23-year-old woman named Amy Bradley walked out onto the deck of a massive cruise liner and was never seen by her family again. She didn't fall, she didn't drown, she didn't leave a note. She was simply gone. But here is where this story becomes something different. Something that will stay with you long after this video ends. Because Amy Bradley was seen again, by strangers, in places no missing person should ever be. And every single time someone tried to reach her, she vanished again. This is the story of a young woman, a ship full of secrets, and a disappearance that the United States government still has not solved over 25 years later. Stay with me, because what happened to Amy Bradley is not just a disappearance. It is one of the most deeply unsettling cases of alleged human trafficking in American history, and the people who may know the truth are still out there. And before we go any further into this story, we want to hear from you. Go ahead and drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And while you are down there, I need to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the story you are about to hear is going to stay with you for a very long time. Now, let us go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened to Amy Bradley, you have to understand who Amy Bradley was and how much life she had left to live. Amy Lynn Bradley was born on May 12, 1974, in the state of Virginia. She grew up in Danville, a mid-sized city in the southern part of the state, in a family that was, by every account, genuinely close. Her father, Ron Bradley, was a former military man, steady, protective, present. Her mother, Iva Bradley, was warm and involved. Her younger brother, Brad Bradley, was her companion, her confidant, the kind of sibling she spent real time with. By the time Amy was in her early 20s, she was the kind of young woman who made an impression on people not through drama, but through energy. She was athletic, she was sharp, she had a laugh that people remembered. She loved music, live music especially, and she had the kind of open, social personality that made her comfortable in a crowd. She was, in every recognizable sense, a young person full of forward motion. By March of 1998, Amy had just completed her degree at Longwood University in Virginia, a degree in physical education, a subject she was passionate about. She had plans to go further. She was considering pursuing a master's degree in sports psychology, a field that aligned perfectly with who she was, someone who understood the relationship between the body and the mind, between discipline and performance. She had recently moved into her own apartment, a first step into full independence. She had adopted a female bulldog named Daisy, who was waiting for her at home. She had a new job lined up at a computer consulting firm, set to begin on the Monday after she returned from vacation. In other words, Amy Bradley was not a young woman without direction. She was a young woman standing right at the threshold of the life she had worked for. Everything was lined up. Everything was ready. She just had to come home. Her mother, Iva, would later remember the specific details of that moment the way only a parent can. On the day before the family left for their vacation, Amy had taken 15 rolls of film with her, intending to take enough photographs to fill a collage for her coffee table. She had purchased souvenirs for her friends, while she had sent a postcard from Puerto Rico explaining that she would be in Aruba the following day. She was present. She was engaged. She was paying attention to her life with the kind of deliberate joy that comes when you know things are finally falling into place. Eva also recalled telling people before the trip that Amy had a healthy fear of the open ocean. Despite being a trained and gifted swimmer, a lifeguard in fact, Amy was not entirely comfortable with the vastness of the sea. The cruise had taken some convincing, but it was a family trip, and Amy was going. On March 21st, 1998, the Bradley family, Ron, Eva, Amy, and 21-year-old Brad, boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. The ship had departed from San Juan, Puerto Rico. An hour in its route took it through some of the most beautiful waters in the Western Hemisphere. The first port of call was the island of Aruba. From there, the ship was scheduled to continue to Curaçao, a small Dutch Caribbean island just off the northern coast of Venezuela, before eventually making its way back. It was a 7-day voyage, a celebration. The Bradleys were the kind of family that made the most of their time together, and from all accounts, the early days of the cruise were exactly what they had hoped for. They ate together, they explored the ship, they enjoyed the sun. Ron had his camera. He was documenting everything. The Rhapsody of the Seas was a large modern vessel, the kind of floating city that cruise lines had become expert at building by the late 1990s. It had restaurants and pools and bars and entertainment. It had a nightclub. It had a live band. And it was that live band, a group performing Caribbean-influenced music aboard the ship, that would become one of the central threads in the story of Amy Bradley's disappearance. The band was called Blue Orchid. They were popular with passengers. They played every night and drew a crowd. And for Amy, a young woman who genuinely loved live music and dancing, they were a natural attraction. Over the course of the first days of the cruise, Amy spent time near the performances. She danced. She socialized. One member of the band in particular began spending time near Amy. His name was Alistair Douglas, but everyone on that ship knew him by his nickname, Yellow. Alistair Douglas, Yellow, was an entertainer aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. He had dyed hair, which gave him his nickname, and he was outgoing and social in the way that performers often are. He and Amy appeared friendly. There was video footage later recovered by investigators that showed the two of them dancing together at the ship's disco. Amy's family, watching these interactions at the time, saw nothing alarming. This was vacation. People made friends. People danced. The atmosphere was relaxed. The music was good. And the Caribbean sun was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. None of the Bradleys saw anything in those early days that made them pause. None of them could have imagined that, by the final night of the cruise, the interaction between their daughter and this man would become one of the most scrutinized details in an FBI investigation. March 23, 1998 was the final full night of the cruise. The ship was making its way toward Curaçao, and by morning, passengers would be preparing to dock and eventually begin the journey home. That evening, the Bradley family dressed for a formal dinner, one of those occasions cruise lines build into their schedules. A moment of elegance on the water. They ate together. They talked. And then, as the evening moved into night and the nightclub opened and Blue Orchid began to play, Amy and her brother Brad stayed up to enjoy the music. According to Brad's own account, the two of them stayed up late, dancing, drinking, enjoying the final hours of a trip they had shared together. It was one of those nights that close siblings remember. The music was good, the mood was good, and for a few hours there was nothing in the world except the ship and the sea in the moment. And at some point in the early hours of March 24th, around 3:30 in the morning, Brad Bradley made his way back to the family cabin. He was tired. The night had been long. He left Amy at the disco. She was an adult. She was fine. She was on a cruise ship surrounded by people, and she had the key card to get back to their shared cabin. At 3:40 in the morning, that key card was swiped. The door lock system on the Rhapsody of the Seas recorded that entry. Amy Bradley had returned to the cabin. She was inside. She was safe. And then, at some point between 3:40 in the morning and the moment Ron Bradley woke up, everything changed. Because when Ron opened his eyes at approximately 5:30 in the morning and looked out toward the balcony of the cabin. He saw his daughter. She was there, asleep in a deck chair, exactly as she sometimes liked to rest. He saw her, and he went back to sleep. At approximately 6 o'clock in the morning, 30 minutes later, Ron Bradley woke again. He looked at the balcony. The chair was empty. The sliding glass door was slightly ajar. Inside the cabin, draped over a lounge chair, was the polo shirt Amy had been wearing the night before. Her sandals were there. Her cigarettes and her lighter were gone. Nothing else was missing. Not her money, not her passport, not a bag, not a note. Just Amy. Ron Bradley searched the cabin. He checked the bathroom. He looked around the room with the specific attention of a father who is trying not to panic but already knows in his body that something is wrong. He went to Brad's room. He checked the hallway. He knocked on doors. And then, when he could no longer avoid the conclusion that his daughter was simply not there, Ron Bradley walked to the ship's security office and reported his daughter missing. What happened in the hours that immediately followed Ron Bradley's report to ship security is a question that has defined this case for more than 2 decades. Because the Rhapsody of the Seas was approaching Curaçao, the ship was scheduled to dock that morning, and in the critical window between the moment Amy was reported missing and the moment the gangplanks went down and passengers and crew began to disembark, the full weight of a decisive, coordinated response did not come. The ship's crew conducted a search, but that search did not prevent people from leaving. It did not lock down the vessel. It did not create the kind of controlled environment that might have held everyone in place while a young American woman was unaccounted for. By the time the full gravity of the situation became undeniable, the ship had docked. People had moved, and the trail, and if there was one, had already begun to go cold. 2 crew members, women working aboard the ship, would later tell investigators something important. They reported seeing Amy Bradley in the early hours of that morning, after her father had noted she was gone from the balcony. They said they saw her on an elevator, accompanied by Alistair Douglas, Yellow, the band member. They said this was around 6 o'clock in the morning, at or just after the time Ron had realized Amy was missing. Approximately 15 minutes later, they reportedly saw Douglas again, this time alone. The women's account was passed to investigators. FBI agents boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas and began their work. Douglas was questioned. He acknowledged that he had danced with Amy the night before. He said he had left the party around 1 o'clock in the morning. His account of the final hours was offered, but it was vague, short on specifics about where they had gone, what was said, and when exactly he had last seen her. Douglas voluntarily submitted to a polygraph examination. The results were inconclusive. The FBI released Douglas. He had not been charged. There was at that point insufficient evidence to hold him. And when the Rhapsody of the Seas docked at Curaçao and the band Blue Orchid disembarked, Alistair Douglas walked off that ship and into the island. He was free. The Bradley family watched it happen, and Ron Bradley, standing on a dock in a foreign country with no daughter and no answers, began the investigation that he would not stop for the rest of his life. And there was one other detail from the ship that the Bradleys found deeply troubling. Eva Bradley had gone to collect the photographs taken during the cruise from the ship's professional photographer. The kind of printed souvenir photos that cruise lines sell to passengers at the end of a voyage. The photographer confirmed that photographs of Amy had been printed, but when Eva went to find them, they were gone. Someone had apparently already collected them. It was a detail that could mean nothing, or everything. The Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard launched a 4-day search of the waters surrounding the ship's route. 3 helicopters and a radar plane were deployed. The initial assumption, pushed by the ship's own cruise director, was that Amy had either accidentally gone overboard or had intentionally taken her own life. The Bradley family rejected both theories with force and clarity. Brad would later say that Amy had just graduated from college. She had a new apartment. She had a new job. She had a dog waiting for her at home. She had a full life that she had just begun to step into. The idea that she had jumped was, to her family, not just wrong, it was an insult. And the idea that she had fallen overboard also failed to account for the facts. Amy was a trained lifeguard. She was a capable athletic swimmer. And more importantly, no evidence of any kind, physical or otherwise, placed her at the ship's railing in those early morning hours. The FBI opened a formal investigation under their crimes at sea jurisdiction, the legal framework that gives American federal authorities power to investigate crimes occurring on ships in international waters. Well, agents came aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. They interviewed passengers and crew. They brought search dogs. They worked the case with the tools available to them. But from the very beginning, the investigation ran into the specific obstacles that would define its next 2 decades. Jurisdiction complications, inconsistent cooperation between American, Dutch, and Caribbean authorities, and the simple geographic reality that Curaçao was not American soil. The FBI could investigate, but acting decisively in a foreign jurisdiction was slow and difficult. Every request required negotiation. Every lead required coordination. And the case, despite the genuine effort of individual investigators, moved at a pace that left the Bradley family in a constant state of anguish. About a month after Amy disappeared, Ron Bradley and Brad Bradley returned to Curaçao. They were not done. They put up posters. They walked the streets. They talked to anyone who might have seen something. And on one of those days, a cab driver approached them. He told them that on the morning of March the 24th, the morning Amy vanished, he had seen a young woman matching Amy's description running through the parking lot near the port. She appeared to be in distress. She was looking for a phone. The cab driver said he remembered her distinctly because of her eyes. Green eyes, just as the reward poster described. He also said he had seen her at other locations on the island in the days after. The Bradleys took this account seriously. They passed it to investigators. Authorities were never able to independently corroborate what the driver said, but Ron Bradley believed him. And he filed the account away in the growing record of a story that refused to end. In August of 1998, 5 months after Amy disappeared, 2 Canadian tourists vacationing in Curaçao came forward with something that stopped people cold. They reported that they had seen a woman on a popular diving beach on the island who matched Amy's description so closely that they were convinced it was her. But it was not just the general appearance that caught their attention. This woman had tattoos, specific, distinctive tattoos, including one of the Tasmanian devil on her shoulder, exactly as Amy had. They were only 2 feet away from her. They described her eyes, they described her body, and crucially, one of the tourists, a man named David Carmichael, said he had later seen this woman walking along the beach with 2 men, one of whom he believed he recognized as Alistair Douglas. Carmichael was so certain of what he had seen that he contacted the Bradley family directly. He phoned Ron Bradley. He flew to Virginia to meet with the family in person. David Carmichael told the Bradleys that he had recognized Amy from her photo on America's Most Wanted, a nationally broadcast television program that had featured her case. He said the encounter on the beach had never left him. His words to the family were direct. He said he was haunted by it. The FBI investigated the sighting. They took it seriously. But Curaçao was outside American jurisdiction, and the island's local authorities did not always move with the urgency that the Bradley family needed. The lead eventually went cold. Carmichael's account could not be independently confirmed, but it was not dismissed. It sat in the file as one of a growing number of credible, unsettling reports from multiple unconnected individuals, all pointing toward the same conclusion, that Amy Bradley had not drowned, had not gone overboard, and had not ended her own life. She was alive. She was somewhere, and she could not get out. In the summer of 1999, a private investigator named Frank Jones entered the picture. He contacted the Bradley family and told them he was a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer with a network of ex-Army Rangers and former Navy SEALs who could operate in Curaçao and potentially locate Amy. Ron and Iva were desperate. They were willing to do anything. Within days of being hired, Jones told the family that Amy had been spotted on the beach several times in the company of different men. He told them she was being held against her will by individuals connected to the drug trade operating out of the island. He told them that money would be needed, money for Amy's extraction, for operational costs for the people on the ground. The Bradleys, reaching into every resource available to them, sent Frank Jones a total of $210,000. Some of that money had been donated by the nation's missing children organization. Frank Jones took the money, and Amy was not rescued. In January of 1999, less than a year after Amy disappeared, a United States Navy petty officer named William Hefner came forward with an account that investigators would describe as one of the most significant in the entire case. Hefner said that while stationed in Curaçao, he had visited a bar establishment on the island. While seated in the bar area, a woman approached him. She was Caucasian. She appeared frightened, and she told him her name was Amy Bradley. According to Hefner's account, which he gave to the FBI and which he has maintained consistently, the woman told him she had been on a cruise ship. She told him that she had left the ship on her own to find drugs, and that she had ended up being held in this establishment against her will. She was pleading with him. She was asking for help. She was right in front of him. Hefner said he spoke with the woman. He said he tried to understand the situation, but before he could take any meaningful action, before he could get her out, before he could call for help, before he could do the thing that might have ended this story right there, she was gone. Someone intervened. She was moved. Taken back into a part of the building he could not access, and Hefner was left sitting in that bar, in that foreign city, trying to process what had just happened. He eventually reported the encounter to authorities. The FBI investigated his account. William Hefner submitted to a polygraph examination, and he passed. Investigators considered his account credible. It meant something enormous. If Hefner was telling the truth, Amy Bradley had been alive in Curaçao in January of 1999, 10 months after her disappearance, alive and trapped, and the world had come within arm's reach of finding her, and missed her. The detail in Hefner's account about Amy saying she had left the ship to find drugs has been a point of discussion for investigators and the public alike. It raised questions about what Amy's state of mind may have been on that final night aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. It introduced the possibility that her disappearance was not entirely against her will in its opening moments, that perhaps she had in some way stepped into a dangerous situation on her own. But it also raised an even darker question, because even if Amy had made a choice that night that put her in a vulnerable position, she had not chosen what came next. She had not chosen to be held against her will. She had not chosen to be unable to leave. Whatever door she had walked through, something had locked it behind her. And by the time William Hefner sat across from her in that bar in Curaçao, she was not free. Time passed. Leads emerged and dissolved. The Bradley family kept fighting. They appeared on television, and they hired more investigators. They pushed the FBI. They pushed the State Department. They pushed Royal Caribbean. They refused to let Amy's name fade into the background noise of unsolved cases that the public eventually forgets. And then, in the year 2005, 7 years after Amy vanished from the Rhapsody of the Seas, 2 separate encounters occurred in 2 different locations, and together they rebuilt the urgency around this case in a way that nothing had since William Hefner's testimony. The first came from a woman named Judy Maurer. Maurer was an American tourist vacationing in Barbados. She was inside a store. Some accounts describe it as a restroom area, when a group of men came in with a woman. According to Maurer, the men were speaking to the woman in a way that was pressured, urgent, threatening. They were telling her a deal was coming and that she needed to be ready. When Judy Maurer emerged from the restroom stall, she saw a woman standing by the sink. The woman was visibly distressed, emotional, shaken, clearly not in a position of comfort or safety. Maurer asked her what was wrong. She asked her name, and the woman told her, Amy. She said her name was Amy Bradley. Maurer was an ordinary tourist. She had not been looking for Amy Bradley. She had not arrived in Barbados with any knowledge of the case. She simply encountered a woman in distress and asked a question. The name she received in response was one that would stay with her. Maurer reported the encounter to American authorities. The FBI added it to the file alongside the other sightings. No arrest was made. No confirmation followed. But Judy Moore's account was consistent with something that investigators had been piecing together for years: that Amy Bradley was not dead, but that she was being moved, that she was in a situation she could not escape on her own. In that same year, 2005, a second development emerged that added an entirely different dimension to the case. An anonymous individual contacted the Bradley family with a link to a website. The website, whose nature made its context unmistakable to anyone who accessed it, contained a photograph. The photograph depicted a woman. And when the Bradleys looked at that photograph, when Ron Bradley looked at that image, he believed he was looking at his daughter. The photo was forwarded to the FBI. Federal investigators subjected it to forensic analysis. They enhanced it. They examined it. And their conclusion was neither a definitive confirmation nor a definitive denial. They could not say with certainty that the woman in the photograph was Amy Bradley, but they could not rule it out either. The image was deemed credible enough to continue investigating. And what it suggested, a young woman from Virginia appearing on a website of that nature 7 years after she vanished, was something that Ron and Eva Bradley have had to carry with them ever since. To understand what law enforcement and independent investigators now believe is the most credible explanation for what happened to Amy Bradley, it is necessary to understand the world that existed in the Caribbean in 1998. Human trafficking, the forced movement of people across borders for the purposes of exploitation, was not a publicly discussed crisis in that era. The term itself barely entered mainstream conversation. Awareness was minimal. The legal frameworks designed to combat it were weak, fragmented, and inconsistently enforced. In the Caribbean, with its network of small island nations, its porous maritime borders, its enormous tourism infrastructure, and its proximity to major drug trafficking routes, was understood by certain law enforcement circles to be a region where the trade operated with a degree of relative ease that would be difficult to overstate. People could move through those islands in ways that left almost no trace, especially in an era before widespread digital surveillance, before smartphones, before the world became the interconnected tracking system it is today. The theory that has persisted, and that the Bradley family, the FBI, and independent investigators have consistently returned to as the most credible framework for understanding this case, is that Amy Bradley was targeted, not randomly and not spontaneously, but in a deliberate, calculated way. The belief is that she was identified as a target during the cruise itself, possibly before the ship even reached Curaçao, and that her removal from the ship was part of a planned operation carried out by individuals connected to a trafficking network operating in the Caribbean. She was young, she was American, she was attractive, and she was on a ship in international waters where the normal mechanisms of law enforcement jurisdiction were complicated, slow, and easily exploited. She was, in the assessment of those who have studied this case most closely, close to an ideal target for people who operated in this world. And the fact that multiple witnesses saw her alive after her disappearance, and that every sighting placed her in the company of men who controlled her movements, suggests that the machinery of that world had already closed around her. Eva Bradley, Amy's mother, has spoken publicly over the years about the geography of what she believes happened. She has referenced the drug trade routes that run through the Caribbean islands, up from Venezuela, through the chain of small nations toward the United States. She has talked about the way those routes intersect with other forms of exploitation. She was not speculating wildly. She was drawing connections that investigators themselves had drawn. Connections between the underground economy of those islands, the trafficking of human beings, and the specific circumstances of her daughter's disappearance. Ron Bradley, steady, relentless, former military, maintained for years the controlled grief of a man who believed his daughter was alive and was waiting for the one piece of information that would lead him to her. "She's out there," he said in one interview. "I know she is, and we're not going to stop until we find her." The Bradley family filed a lawsuit against Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines in 1999. The core of their argument was that the cruise line had failed in its duty of care, that in the critical hours after Amy was reported missing, the response was inadequate, and that allowing passengers and crew, including the last known person to be seen with Amy, to disembark freely while a woman was unaccounted for, represented a failure so fundamental that it could not be characterized as anything other than negligence. Royal Caribbean's legal response was that the company had acted appropriately and responsibly at all times during the investigation. They maintained that position. The lawsuit proceeded and was eventually settled, but the terms were not publicly disclosed. And whatever financial resolution was reached, it did not answer the question that the family needed answered. It did not bring Amy home. Eva Bradley, speaking publicly about the cruise line's conduct, was direct and unwavering in her assessment. She told journalists and television programs that Royal Caribbean had failed to cooperate with her family, that information and assistance had not been provided in the way she expected of a company that had taken her family aboard their ship and lost her daughter. To this date, the cruise line has failed to cooperate with our family by way of information or assistance, she stated. The company denied that characterization, but the Bradleys had been living the reality of this case for years, and their perspective carried the authority of people who had spent a decade and a half trying to navigate a system that was not designed to find missing persons in international waters. Their fight, whatever its outcome against Royal Caribbean specifically, contributed to something larger. One, because the Bradley case, along with other cases of missing persons and crimes aboard cruise ships, became a catalyst for legislative change. The Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act was signed into law in the United States in 2010. It created new legal requirements for cruise lines operating with American passengers, requirements around the reporting of crimes and missing persons at sea, around the preservation of evidence, around the notification of authorities. It was a genuine, meaningful piece of legislation. It was the result of years of advocacy by families like the Bradleys, families who had gone through what no one should have to go through and who had turned their grief into something that might protect someone else. Ron and Eva Bradley testified. They lobbied. And they showed up in rooms where decisions were made, and they made their case with the quiet, exhausted authority of people who had earned the right to be heard. It was an achievement, a real one. But it was not the achievement they had started looking for on that morning in March of 1998, when Ron woke up and found the balcony chair empty. The Bradleys aged through this story in full public view. There are photographs from the early interviews, taken in the weeks and months after Amy disappeared. And there are photographs from years later, from the 20th anniversary coverage, from the Netflix documentary, from the congressional testimony. You can see time doing what time does to people who carry this kind of weight. The early grief, raw, sharp, the specific pain of new loss, settling over the years into something harder and quieter. The grief of not knowing, the grief of a case file that never closes but never resolves. Eva Bradley once described the experience of waiting as a kind of suspended existence, a life lived in the space between what you know and what you need to know. She talked about Amy's room, about her things, about the sense that closing any of it permanently would feel like a surrender she was not willing to make. Brad Bradley, Amy's brother, who was 21 years old when his sister disappeared from the ship they were both on, who had danced with her just hours before she vanished, has spoken publicly about what it means to grow up alongside an absence, about holidays where her chair was empty, about the strange, specific grief of missing someone you cannot bury, someone whose ending you do not know, someone who exists in your memory as you last saw them while the world outside keeps moving. Brad has been clear about his belief regarding what happened. He told Fox News Digital that he believes Alistair Douglas, Yellow, had a role in what happened to Amy. "I think Yellow went and handed Amy off to somebody who took her down into the crew quarters," Brad said. Douglas has maintained his innocence consistently. He was never charged. But Brad's belief, formed over 27 years of living with the consequences of that night, has never wavered. In 2025, a three-part Netflix documentary series titled Amy Bradley is Missing brought fresh attention to the case. Directed by Ari Mark and Phil Lott, the series featured interviews with the Bradley family, with FBI officials working the investigation, and with people who claimed to have seen Amy alive over the years. One of the most striking moments in the documentary came when Amy's daughter, Amika, the child of Alistair Douglas, called her father on camera during her interview. She confronted him directly about Amy. His response, captured in real time, was defensive and exasperated. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. He denied walking on the beach in Curaçao with Amy, claiming he does not like beaches and avoids them. The call did not produce a confession. It did not provide a resolution, but it produced something. A visible human reaction at the mention of a name from a man who has been part of this story since the beginning. In late 2025, documentary director Ari Mark spoke to The Hollywood Reporter and revealed a series of developments that those close to the case described as significant. The FBI had interviewed two individuals with ties to human trafficking in the Caribbean. Two people of interest who had been brought in for questioning in connection with Amy's disappearance. Mark described the interviews as a pretty new development and called it a big deal. Working alongside the Bradley family's private investigator, Mark also stated that the investigation had potentially identified the specific trafficking network responsible for Amy's disappearance, a dominant organization operating in the Caribbean, and had begun to understand who within that network might have been responsible. These were not vague theories or unverified rumors. These were active FBI interviews of specific individuals connected to specific criminal networks. After 27 years, the gears of the investigation were, by certain accounts, finally moving. There was more. A source reached out to Ari Mark in October of 2025 with a claim that, if true, would alter the entire landscape of this case. The source alleged that Amy Bradley had given birth to a child after her disappearance. The claim came from a single source and had not been independently confirmed at the time of reporting, but investigators and forensic experts took it seriously enough to consider its implications. Peter Valentine, a former Connecticut State Police detective and the chair of the Forensic Science Department at the University of New Haven, told Fox News Digital that if a child existed, DNA recovery could offer critical information. It could establish Amy's location. It could identify individuals who had been in contact with her. It could open a door that 27 years of investigation had failed to open through any other means. The possibility was fragile, it was unverified, but it was there. And for a family that has spent nearly 3 decades holding on to possibility, it was something. There was one more detail from 2025 that investigators noted quietly. A hit to the Amy Bradley is Missing website, the official site connected to the Netflix documentary and the ongoing search for information, came from a public computer inside a location that has not been fully disclosed. The IP address was tracked. The implications of where that computer was located have not been made fully public, but the fact that someone, somewhere was accessing the site from that specific location was considered significant enough to investigate. Brad Bradley's message to The Hollywood Reporter in the context of all these developments was simple and direct. He said that the case ultimately comes down to a single thing. Somebody knows something. The whole case comes down to someone coming forward with what they know. After 27 years, that is still true. It has always been true. Somewhere in the world there is a person, possibly more than one, who knows what happened to Amy Bradley, and they have not yet spoken. The Amy Bradley case forces a specific kind of reckoning, not the abstract reckoning that true crime content sometimes produces, the comfortable distance of engaging with a mystery as entertainment, but something more immediate and more personal. Because Amy Bradley disappeared on a vacation. She was in a public place, surrounded by thousands of people, in the company of her family, on a ship operated by a major American corporation. She was not in a remote location. She was not alone in a dangerous place. She was on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship in 1998, doing exactly what millions of Americans do every year, and she vanished anyway. The systems that were supposed to protect her, the ship's security, the local Coast Guard, the international legal frameworks, the cooperation between jurisdictions, failed. They were slow and complicated and insufficient. And a 23-year-old woman from Virginia paid the price for every gap in every system that was supposed to catch her. We live in a world that has changed significantly since 1998. Cell phones exist, as digital surveillance is widespread. The Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act has strengthened reporting requirements for crimes at sea. Human trafficking is now a recognized crisis with dedicated federal task forces and international organizations working to combat it. Awareness is higher, response mechanisms are better, and yet, Amy Bradley has not been found. The case is still open. The trail is cold in some places and warm in others. New leads emerge and are investigated. The FBI's reward for information stands at $100,000. The Bradley family, after nearly 3 decades, has not stopped. They have not accepted the comfort of a closed file or the finality of a memorial service. They are still looking. They are still asking. They are still standing on the figurative dock where they were left on March 24th, 1998, and watching the water and waiting for the phone to ring. If Amy Bradley is alive today, and there are credible investigators and credible witnesses who believe she is now in her early 50s. She has missed her 20s. She has missed her 30s. She has missed her 40s. She has missed Daisy, the bulldog she adopted the day before the cruise and never came home to. She has missed the apartment she had just moved into. She has missed the job she was supposed to start on the Monday after she came home. She has missed every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday that her family has lived through without her. And if she is out there, if by some extraordinary chain of circumstances, she is somewhere in the world and can in any way access the story being told about her, then the thing her family needs her to know is this: they have never stopped. Not for a day, not for a moment. The chair on the balcony has been empty for 27 years, but the door has never been closed. Her family has never stopped believing she can walk back through it. The Rhapsody of the Seas continued to sail after that morning in March of 1998. It carried thousands more passengers to thousands more destinations. It was eventually refurbished and renamed. The Caribbean kept shimmering in the sun. The tourism industry kept growing. The cruise lines kept filling their ships with people chasing the feeling of freedom on the open water. But on a balcony on that ship, on one specific morning in one specific March, more than a quarter century ago, a father woke up, looked at an empty chair, and the world quietly, permanently changed. Amy Lynn Bradley, born May 12, 1974. Missing since March 24, 1998. Still listed as an active case by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Still someone's daughter, still someone's sister, still real. If you have any information about Amy Bradley's whereabouts, the FBI tip line and the official reward information are in the description below. Real information goes there. It could be the thing that finally brings her home. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Amy Bradley on that ship? Do you believe she is still alive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This community takes these cases seriously, and your perspective matters. And if this story moved you, if you believe Amy Bradley's name deserves to be heard by more people, share this video. That single act reaches further than you think. Subscribe if you have not already. There are more stories coming. Stories that demand the same attention, the same refusal to look away. Amy Bradley's case is not over, and neither are we.